Kill Slade, a John Slade Western, written by Victor M. Alvarez, narrated by Andy Froyland. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. Romans chapter 12, 19 through 20, King James Version. Not unless my guns find them first. John Slade, Texas Ranger. Prologue, March 2016, Waco, Texas. The Texas Ranger Hall of Fame and Museum is the state-designated official historical center of the famed Texas Rangers Law Enforcement Agency. It consists of the Homer Garrison Jr. Museum Gallery, the Texas Ranger Hall of Fame, the Texas Ranger Research Center, and the headquarters of the Texas Rangers Company F. The city of Waco serves as the appointed trustee on behalf of the Texas Department of Public Safety and the Texas Legislature. They've been roaming around the museum for the better part of 15 minutes. Up ahead were the entrances into the Hall of Fame. Father and son walked in hand and approached a door leading to the Texas Rangers Hall of Fame section of the huge complex. Several patrons were walking and talking, staring at all the photographs and reading from the inscriptions. The father, a 6'2" broad-shouldered man in his early 40s with black hair and some gray showing at the temples, had a dark Texas tan, steely gray eyes. He wore a black, wide-brimmed Stetson and well-worn brown boots. The son? Well, the son was a smaller version of his father. Little by little, the father had been directing his son to the final wall display, and for very good reason, he thought. Ahead, they stopped at a list of the greatest Rangers who ever roamed the Texas frontier, from John Armstrong, Lender McNeely, all the way to William L. Wright, and next to their names were their portrait photographs, and on some, portrait drawings, while others were depictions or photographs of Rangers on horseback. The father, with great pride, pointed out to his 12-year-old son his great-great-grandfather, John Slade, whose name was etched on the Hall of Fame wall, and where his photograph was proudly displayed. The photograph of John Slade was taken in July of 1895 in San Antonio, Texas, and depicted him in a beard and long flowing hair, parted in the middle. He was wearing a white shirt and a bolo around the shirt's collar with an open black two-piece suit, holding a Stetson hat, standing arm in arm with his wife Victoria as they smiled for the camera. The son gazed at John Slade's photograph and then turned towards his dad. He was struck by the uncanny likeness of John Slade to his father. "Dad, he looks just like you," his son, Jonathan Randolph Slade, said as he looked up at his father. His father beamed with pride at Jonathan's observations. "It's very important, son. It's the reason I brought you here, that we, and now you, keep his memory alive. He's part of our family connection, and it's such a wonderful gift that I get to pass on to you. It should be treasured for years to come as you tell your children about him." "I understand, Dad." John Slade was one of the greatest Rangers to ever pin on the star of Texas Ranger, the father said with a profound sense of pride in his voice. "Dad, is it true about all that was written about him?" Jonathan asked. "And those stories you've read to me from all the letters you have?" "Yes, son, but those are just a few of his stories. And there were a lot more that have been handed down from father to son, which have never been written down. And I've started writing them in story form, so you can read them at some point." "Like what, Father?" the son asked. But the father didn't seem too comfortable discussing the stories in front of so many patrons roaming through the halls. Slowly, he led Jonathan towards the exit of the Hall of Fame. "I tell you what, I'll tell you the story of the day he and 30 Rangers went after the Hatcher brothers and their gang of outlaws, and the gunfights that he was involved with. They got back in the car and made their way home. It's one I never told you about," the man said. "Oh, Dad, I can't wait." As the father placed the car in gear, the son, sitting in the front passenger seat, buckled on his seatbelt and immediately asked about the story. "Now, Dad?" he asked. "All right," his father started. My father explained it to me this way. Now, you sure you want to hear this now, or would you rather wait till we get home?" "Oh, Dad, please, now, all right?" All right. Before I start, you want to know what makes a Texas Ranger?" "What's that, Dad?" In the words of another famous Ranger, a Ranger is an officer who is able to handle any given situation without definite instructions from his commanding officer or higher authority. This ability must be proven before a man becomes a Ranger. "Is that the test given to him, Dad?" "Sure is, in more ways than one." "Oh, I want to be a Ranger just like my grandfather." "Well, you were born into it, son. Don't forget that." I won't, Dad." "All right, then." Father paused, trying to get his thoughts in order. It was around 130 years ago, back in 1881, when he lived out in Blanco, Texas. John Slade was married then to Emily Evans. They had a horse ranch. Following is the account handed down to him by his father and his grandfather, and written in story form by John Edward Slade VI. When he lived out in Blanco, Texas, John Slade was married then to Emily Evans. They had a horse ranch. The following is the account handed down to him by his father and his grandfather, and written in story form by John Edward Slade VI. Part 1. Death from the Shadows. December 1881, Blanco, Texas. They rode in from the east in the cold dead of night and topped a ridge overlooking what appeared to be a horse ranch with a bunkhouse, barn, and a large family house. They reined in their horses to a stop. They were professional bounty hunters. Without a word, they knew the drill. The Hatcher brothers stared silently into the darkness, down into the valley below. The cold wind blew and howled onto their upturned faces, as if in grave anticipation of what was to come. They saw a small gas-lit lamp that hung by the entrance to the large house, just barely lighting the area. They didn't see any lights coming from inside the house, nor the bunkhouse. They only used hand gestures that directed each other to go here and there. Again, no words were necessary. They were assured that the ex-Texas Ranger was living at the cabin with his wife by the Mexican farmer who'd led him there. And also, according to the farmer, there were no hired hands on the property, thereby accomplishing unfettered what they were there to do. That Mexican farmer, whose weathered face was as craggy as the landscape, had been in Emilio's cantina that night, as he overheard two Americanos talking about an ex-Texas Ranger who he knew was a bounty hunter that lived just outside of town. He was sure that was the one to whom they were referring. So building up enough courage, he gulped down the last of his whiskey, and after using his shirt sleeve to wipe it across his mouth, he approached them, ever hopeful he'll make some money with his information. Assuring the Americanos he knew who they were asking about, he was immediately hired to lead them to the cabin, after the promise of a $5 gold piece for his trouble. One of the brothers, Willis Hatcher, the older of the two, a tall, bulky man with gray, steely eyes, turned slightly towards his younger brother with a hint of a smile. The brother, Jerry Hatcher, smaller version of his brother with deep blue eyes, he just smiled back. They knew that tonight was going to be easy pickings. They were unafraid, immune to fear, a product of the war and the type of life they had set out for themselves. These were men who had hunted and been hunted by professionals and rank amateurs alike, and they were still alive. Both had been shot once or twice and survived, and they both bore the scars of that as did their souls. Everywhere they went, death and destruction were left behind as a grim reminder. They were determined men, but that wasn't always so. After the war, 3 of them, the Hatcher brothers and a cousin named Calvin West, came out of the Confederate Army barely alive, their minds destroyed by all that death and war had to offer. Unable to find any type of decent employment, they turned to the only profession worth their salt, bounty hunting. But life was hard in the beginning. They were a band of 12 desperados who made a bloody rep for themselves through cunning and savage determination. They persevered to the point that no one got in their way. If anyone interfered with them, well, they were killed for their efforts. But now it was just the 2 brothers and the other members of the gang. It was Calvin West who had been shot and killed in a card game over a month ago by the same man they'd been tracking and now planned on killing tonight. Their intended victim was a man named John Slade, who was an experienced ex-Texas Ranger and a legend in southern Texas. The word was that Slade rode with Leander McNeely's Rangers down the Nueces Strip, crossing into Mexico, getting involved in a heated gunfight where he was seriously shot, and then later turned to bounty hunting to make a living. They needed to be extra careful, making sure nothing went wrong. The night was dark, with only the moon occasionally obscured by scudding clouds. They worked better at night. They liked it that way. Before them, the valley was wide and spacious and level to some extent. In dismounting, they led the horses to a clump of trees and tied them up. Then, in the distance, wolves howled, loud and clear. Above the howl, the Mexican farmer, Tuco Sanchez, took it upon himself to say, "Hey, señor, my 5 pesos, por favor," to the older of the 2 Americanos. The 2 bounty hunters stared stony-eyed at the farmer, almost forgetting he was still there. Their eyes revealed a surly confidence. Willis Hatcher flipped back his coat, reached into his vest, pulled out a thin gold coin, and without looking at it, flipped it toward the Mexican, who failed to catch it midair. He clawed to the ground and after a few seconds found it, slipped it into his trouser pocket. He had no horse, and he had ridden double with one of the Americanos, as he now ran back the way he'd come, quickly making the sign of the cross across his chest while thanking La Virgen de Guadalupe they hadn't killed him. Once the Mexican was gone, the 2 brothers drew their Colt single-action peacemakers, checking the loads, and without a word, started walking down the ridge towards the cabin. They say that you can't live in the past and that the future always looks brighter, since worry and rumination are the foes of the present. He'd listened to those whose ideas at most made no sense until something caused a dramatic change in their own lives. He knew the feeling, and his life would never be the same. He still clings to her vision, feels her presence just before he wakes. When he does, his memories of her come with a floodgate of tears and at the same time, hatred and revenge. They'd come at night, like most wild animals do, looking for him. They found him all right, alongside his wife Emily. He was always an extremely light sleeper, which saved his life once or twice, so the moment he knew something was wrong was when he was woken by the sounds of his bedroom door slowly opening. The rusty door hinges gave them away. He saw them then, silhouetted against the light of the full moon that shone through the bedroom's only window, 2 of them with their guns drawn, but he was too slow to react. "Emily!" he cried out, momentarily halting, dazed, confused, taken by surprise. His gun belt was hanging from the bedpost on the other side of the bed, left there just before their lovemaking. Too far for him to reach, draw, and defend Emily and himself. Suddenly a shot rang out. "No!" Slade cried out. The man on the right was the first to shoot as Slade tried to cover his wife with his own body, but again it was too late. She woke up almost in a sitting position as the bullet entered her forehead, dead before the impact of the slug threw her onto her back, with him on top of her. A few seconds may have passed, or less. He had no way of knowing, when he heard one of the 2 killers shout out just before he fired his gun once again, "This is for our cousin, lawman!" Slade quickly glanced over at his pistols. He thought, "Oh, if I could only reach my guns." Just as he tried reaching for them over his wife's body, His tranquil bedroom was turned into a bedlam of horror as the intruders fired their guns several times more, as John Slade's body shook with the impact of the heavy caliber bullets. The loud, deep booming of the gunshots reverberated off the walls in the small confines of the bedroom as slug after slug found their marks. Then, slowly, Slade's right eye opened momentarily. Through the dim light, he saw the killers backing away out of the cabin. As he slowly started losing consciousness, and with pain shooting through his entire body, he struggled to rise. The pain was too intense. Bleeding profusely from his wounds and unable to attempt getting up on his elbows once again, he slumped back on top of Emily, crying with his wife's name dying on his lips as blood oozed from his mouth and nose. With a great effort of will, he tried to focus for just a second on his wife. Suddenly, the pain was gone. His mind fell into that motionless black void.